So I will say this every time I get a chance. If you are looking at a diagnosis and you're looking at medical records and you're trying to research what that diagnosis means, use websites that end in .org or .edu because they're not profiting off scaring you. They're going to give you a very realistic picture of what it looks like to parent a child with this diagnosis.
Your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in La La Land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. What does molecular biology and adoption have to do with one another? I have no clue, but I'm sure our guest today will have an answer. Today, we're diving into the world of medically complex adoption. Hailing from Alabama, Jennifer Kelly is a devoted member of her church community and a mother of 4 through adoption. As the program coordinator for ACF Adoptions' ACF Plus program, she leverages her scientific expertise and personal experiences to help families navigate the challenges of adopting medically complex children. Jennifer's journey is deeply personal. After adopting her daughter Joy and tragically losing her to medical complexities, Jennifer dedicated her life to supporting other families in similar situations. With over 10 years of experience, she is considered an expert in this often underserved community and frequently speaks at conferences for medical and adoption professionals. Join us as Jennifer shares her invaluable insights, discusses the intricacies of medically complex adoption, and highlights her compassionate work. If there's one thing I've come to know about Jennifer Kelly, it's that when she is passionate about something and puts her mind to it, she will make it happen, no matter the challenge. She's a fighter, a strong advocate for those who need it most, and a beacon of hope and guidance in the adoption community. Let's welcome Jennifer Kelly to the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. I don't know what to say after such a glowing welcome. I'm blushing.
Well, you know, we like to hype up our guests. So,
well, thank you.
You're welcome. I want to dig in. I'm so excited to have you here because I think this is a really unique conversation that isn't talked about very much. But let's just start from let's lay the foundation. When we're talking about medically complex adoptions, what exactly does that mean? And is it any different than special needs adoptions? Let's break it all down for people.
So medically complex adoption is part of what we used to call special needs adoptions. A big component of the reason for the wording change is that the term special needs is starting to have a lot of negative connotation with adults with disabilities and teens with disabilities, and even now some children with disabilities. They don't like the phrasing of themselves being identified as having special needs. So using the term medical complexity is an attempt to try to change the verbiage to something that is more acceptable in the disabled community. In addition to that, sometimes a special needs adoption refers to maybe a child who has no medical complexity but is older, or there is some legal piece that requires extra attention and detail. The ACF Plus program is focusing exclusively on children 4 and under who have some type of medical diagnosis that affects the adoption process in some way.
Okay. All right. So that's interesting. And I hate the fact that sometimes older children are put into that quote unquote category of special needs or medically complex, or just because they're older. It used to be that they use that term based on race, and thank goodness they've gotten rid of that.
Yeah.
But can you give us some examples? Thankfully, we've come a long way. And I'm glad that this term is changing. This is yet another example of how language is changing in our world. Give me some examples of what that might look like.
So some good examples of children who are being placed through our program that fall under that medically complex diagnosis. The number one diagnosis that we see is a diagnosis of Down syndrome, also known as trisomy 21 or T21. We see a lot of genetic conditions, in fact, things like 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, which is what my daughter had, Prader-Willi syndrome, microdeletion syndromes, that are super rare, maybe, less than a couple hundred kids worldwide have the diagnosis. We also see a lot of children who have some type of fetal anomaly where something did not gestate correctly in the womb during fetal development. So maybe a limb malformation, heart defect, neurological malformation. We see also children who were born extremely premature, 22, 26, 30 weeks, who's had some type of complications, and then traumatic birth, where maybe a baby got stuck in the birth canal or the placenta came loose too soon and a baby went without oxygen for an extended period of time. Maybe, mother had some type of accident or something like that, and there was trauma to the baby while still in utero, but it was related to the trauma, not necessarily something with gestation. Anything like that, where there's usually we consider a medically complex adoption to be something that is not easily corrected or adapted for. So if a child has one limb that they're going to maybe need a prosthesis for, that typically doesn't fall fully in a medically complex adoption. Cleft lips and palates don't typically fall under medically complex adoptions anymore. Things that are considered cosmetic, those types of things aren't generally considered medically complex adoption. But something's going to have a significant impact on the child's development, how much time they're going to spend in the hospital throughout their childhood and adulthood, things that impacts their potential to live alone or independently as an adult, things like that we tend to put under the medically complex adoption category.
Okay. And do you often know about that before a mom gives birth, or is it typically after?
So there was a time when the majority of the adoptions that I was working with under this type of program, I would say 75% were post-birth.
Okay.
We are seeing an increase of women who are diagnosed with something prenatally. I think that that's a combination of both increased access to appropriate testing. So we do more genetic screening now. We do more ultrasounds. We do more detailed ultrasounds. Ultrasound technology has improved. I do want to mention, though, that we're also seeing an increase in these diagnoses directly related to the Dobbs decision, because women might have elected to terminate, do not have access to those types of resources, and so they are proceeding with pregnancy, but are not going to be able to parent, and they are reaching out to us sooner in those cases.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for that. And I know you consider yourself the only nerdy molecular biologist working in adoption. Is that true? Are there none others that at least you found?
At least not that I've found. I've scoured pretty much every adoption conference, and I'm always looking to see if I can find another nerdy scientist. Like, I have a favorite type of math, and it's statistics. That's how big of a nerd I am.
Oh my God, I love it.
Which most people hate statistics. I love them. I love doing that kind of math. But to my knowledge, I'm the only molecular biologist working in adoption.
Well, that's pretty badass. But so how has that background informed or enhanced your adoption work, or has it?
Tremendously. I think one of the biggest things is that I have a good scientific basis for understanding the medicine. I've worked in medicine in one way or another since I was 16. I started out as a volunteer EMT, got my license, and eventually worked as an EMT. I worked as a pharmacy technician. I worked as a CNA. The other thing is I love the program that I came through. Shout out to Jacksonville State University in Jacksonville, Alabama, because my professors were really great about, if you can't teach it to a high school student or a middle school student, you do not understand it. So it was this constant input of information, but also teaching how to then explain that information to somebody else who maybe doesn't have the foundational knowledge that you have. So when I'm working with adoptive parents in particular, and I'm trying to educate them on a diagnosis, and we're trying to look at what resources they might need to have to parent this child and help them reach their fullest potential, it is great because I can take this diagnosis and break it down into digestible pieces and help the adopted parent have a really good foundation for approaching a case as a potential match. Understanding the medicine, I also, can help navigate some of the legal stuff just because my brain understands how those processes work. But I don't do any of the legal work because I leave that to the attorneys. That's not my scope of practice. I would like to say, though, I sometimes come up a little bit deficient because I'm not a social worker, and this is such an important field for emotional support for families. So I always try to disclose up front that I'm not a social worker because I sometimes come across as a little bit clinical, and I don't ever want anybody to take that as I'm not emotionally invested. It's just the personality type. So I'm always the odd duck out when other people are more trained for that emotional support and stuff, and my response is a little bit more clinical.
Right. Well, that's super important, though, because most people don't have any understanding, especially when they get medical records, what they're looking at, what it means, or any of that. Now, I know you adopted 4 times, and I would love to hear about the distinctions of each of those journeys of your story, but specifically with Joy, because I know I specifically know she was medically complex. I don't know if any of the others were, but was that something that you struggled with?
So
understanding what was going on and all of that?
I'll admit there were some deficiencies that I had when we first got Joy's initial medical records, but I was fortunate to be connected to, a lot of the people that I went to grad school went on to medical school and worked in pediatric medicine or worked in cardiology, things like that. Mm-hmm. So I had access to resources that were able to help me interpret the things that I didn't understand. And because my friends had come up through the same program that I had, they had the same ability to explain it down to a level that I understood, to backstep it to me. And whatever child you have, whether you give birth to them or you adopt them, whatever child you have, you learn the languages that you need to learn for your child. So in a medically complex adoption, you learn cardiology language, you learn neurology language, you learn kidney language, you learn whatever languages you need to learn for your kid. My oldest was adopted at 2. It was a kinship adoption. I'll circle back to Joy's adoption in just a minute, but hers was a private, domestic, closed adoption. And then my twins.
So just to clarify what kinship means for people who don't know.
Oh, so kinship adoption is that he was related to me. He was, I don't want to disclose the relationship, but he was related to me.
Okay.
And so that was a family adoption. Joy's adoption was private, domestic, and closed. So we never actually had any direct contact with her birth parent. And then the twins adoption was an open adoption. We unfortunately have lost contact with them, and we have not heard back from them since. And we, leave those communication lines open and always hope that someday we will hear from them again. But we haven't had contact with them in several years. Through their choosing. We're always open to having contact with them. Joy's adoption was kind of a unique circumstance. We just kind of told everybody, hey, we're looking to adopt again. We are putting the pieces together. If you hear of a case that you think might be a good fit for us, just let us know. And a friend that I went to grad school with had moved on to another program and had met a woman who was a foster parent and who was also trying to adopt privately. And so she connected me to her. And then she knew someone who was an adoption consultant. And so she connected me to her, and we all became Facebook friends. And the adoption consultant posted and said, there's a family in Georgia who is looking to place their child who has this genetic condition and this heart defect. There's an attorney in Texas that you have to reach out to if you are interested in the case. And what it was is that and this was all what I was told, was that the family had reached out to all the resources in their area and no one would help them. They all said that no one would want to adopt their daughter. And so they did like an internet search, and eventually this attorney in Texas said, well, I can put something out on Facebook, social media, and see. And this was 2012, so social media wasn't what it is today. Right. But they said, I'll put it out there and see if I can get some families for you. I can't do any of the legal work. I can't, do anything for this adoption, but I can at least try to outreach and help you find a family. Mm-hmm. And so I saw the post, talked to my now ex-husband, and we just, we were like, okay, this is not anything that we can't manage. The genetic stuff, that's what I did. I taught at university at the time, and we had access to a great children's hospital. And so we thought, okay, this is what we can do. We initially were not the family that was picked. There was another family picked, but something fell through with that adoption. And so we had about a month to prepare for Joy to be born, got to be there at the hospital. And as soon as they wheeled her out of the birthing suite into the hallway, they had us meet them there. We went up to the NICU and just kind of took it from there. And it was amazing and beautiful and wonderful. And it was a little bit hard not having the open adoption with them. Mm-hmm. But I'm so thankful every single day that they picked me to be her mother. And it's part of the reason why I love doing the work that I do is I try to honor them, because I don't ever want birth parents having to work that hard. And I don't want any birth parent being told that no one would want their child. Mm. That's just, that's not something that we should be saying to birth families. If you're not able to find a family, we will keep looking, and we'll work together to try to make sure that we're finding families for these kids.
Yeah. How long were you able to be Joy's mom while she was in this world and enjoy her physical being?
Joy lived exactly 62 weeks to the minute. She was born on a Tuesday morning and passed on a Tuesday morning. So I had 14 months with my daughter, and she spent about half of that time at the Children's Hospital during different hospital admission. That was difficult, but I don't regret a single minute of it. I'm thankful for every single minute that I got to be with her. And I try to honor her life as well in the work that I do now.
I love that. Tell me one thing you remember about her personality.
She was obsessed with Project Runway and fashion, even from the time she
That
was
age.
teeny tiny. She would, if I put her in something that was not frou-frou and frilly, she would pull at her clothes and cry. She wanted all the dresses, all the purple, all the frilly tutu, sequins, whatever. And I think I have maybe 2 pictures of her in something that's more gender neutral that she would allow. And one of them was a shark bait shirt. And it was because we would go shark bait, brouhaha, from Nemo, Finding Nemo.
Okay. Yeah.
So she would she would tolerate that one because there was a joke. And then there was a little outfit that somebody had given me that was like little green and white shorts and a white shirt. And it said, "I'm tiny, but I know stuff." And so I always think that was her, okay, I'll wear this because I like what it says. But those were the only outfits that I could ever really get her in that weren't girly. And one of her favorites was this purple onesie that had like a faux pearl necklace painted on the collar of it. And she would just rub like this over it with her little hand. But she was obsessed with fashion and Project Runway. And I would be broke if she had Liz because of just the fashion alone that I'm sure I would have been buying for her.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I love it. It's so interesting with kids how early they show their personalities, right?
Yes. Yes.
And those usually extend out through their life. So yes.
Oh yeah.
She is a little fashion designer up there.
Oh yes. Yes. I often think when I put an outfit on for the day or something, I think I wonder what she would have thought of this one. Like, was this a good choice for her?
I love that.
So, and I try on her birthday and on the day that she passed, I always try to put a little extra effort into getting dressed up for her. So
I love that. That's so special. When did you adopt your boys, who are twins?
The boys were born in late March of 2015, and we took placement of them at 2 weeks old. So right there in April. And well, I guess our official placement date was actually April 15th. We were like 2 little tax deductions. I remember that was the joke that we were making that just we signed the paperwork. They were born at 32 weeks and experienced some withdrawal. They were 4 pounds and 2 pounds. I called Ryan my little chicken because he was so tiny, so tiny. But they're still 3 pounds apart now, but they're the same height. So Adam's a little bit more a little more stocky. But they are 9 now. They are doing fantastic. We have a few delays with some reading and math, but we're getting some supports in school to help with that. My favorite thing is that I'm always told that they are the kindest boys in their classes. Like if there's a new student, they always pair them with one of my boys so that they can kind of take them under their wing and help them. And they're the ones that are always like, if somebody falls on the playground, helping them get up and, cheering them up. And
that is the best thing that we can hear about our children. I get the same. And I'm so proud.
It's my favorite. I'm like, we can figure out the reading and math stuff. That will come eventually. If we have to have supports all the time, that's okay. But kindness is such an underrated, important skill, that people kind of forget that should be something that we focus on. And my boys have it in spades. So I'm very thankful for that.
That's awesome. And were their adoptions a private, through an agency, through an attorney, through?
Yeah. So we did it through an attorney. It was a woman that I had met in one of the genetic support groups for my daughter's condition, was in a foster parent group, and a foster parent had said that she had met this woman and had given her in a there's those Facebook groups where it's free stuff.
Yeah.
She had met this woman, and she was needing some free stuff for her other kids, and she was expecting twins. And the foster parent was like, we can't adopt them, but she asked me if I would help her find somebody to adopt them. Does anybody know of a family looking to adopt? And we, again, had just put it out there on Facebook. Hey, we're looking to adopt, and this is scary this time because we renewed our home study a year after Joy passed, and this was like 15 months after she had passed. So it was scary, and we just kind of asked people to pray for us and support us as we moved through that. And just again, kind of that connection, know somebody, knows somebody, knows somebody, knows somebody, and submitted our profile. And honestly, I never thought that we'd be selected. I thought, okay, this will give us a chance to get feedback from a birth parent on our profile book. So I actually said, I know that we're probably not the family you're looking for, but if you could ask the birth mom to let you know what she thought of our profile book, especially the stuff about our daughter, I would appreciate the feedback. And they loved it. And in fact, the woman the foster parent who had met the birth mother, her and her husband are the boy's godparent.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So first of all, right there, I mean, the power of social media on so many levels.
Yeah.
Still to this day, people ask me, should we be creating a website or putting yourself out on social media? And I say, if you are comfortable with that, you never know where your match is going to come from. So,
Yeah.
and it still works. And while there are maybe more scammers out there and things to look for, people are still matching that way because you never know who's going to know somebody else. And look at the friendship that you created. That also speaks to the power of community and really being in communities that you feel safe and supported in. And you too can meet your best friends and maybe the godparents of your children in a Facebook group. I love it. I love it.
Well, and I will say, I think the part that something I want to say at this juncture is when I matched with the twin, with Joy, there was an adoption consultant involved. So there was somebody, and there was an adoption attorney involved. So there were people who were involved in the process with the social media piece at that time that were experienced and had knowledge. When I matched with the twins, I was already working in adoption and had been for 2 years.
Oh, okay.
So I understood some of the pieces. I think that there does need to be some caution that if you don't have a consultant or an attorney or an agency involved, that you have to exercise a tremendous more caution because there's this knowledge gap. Again, you're not speaking the language that might be necessary to make sure everything's being done within the scope of the law and that nobody's being taken advantage of and all of those types of things. So I think that's why adoption consultants, adoption attorneys, and adoption agencies can be really, really important. The power of social media is amazing, but like you said, there are some bad actors out there. So you want to make sure that you've got people that you trust and know to help support you in that.
Thank you for making that distinction. That's really important. Now, when you went to adopt after Joy, were you open to medically complex again?
I was, and that was mostly based on my spiritual faith. Mm-hmm. It was very much I probably should have been afraid to adopt Joy, but even with the amount of pain that I experienced when she passed and continue to experience with this day, I wouldn't change any of that. I loved being her mother. And so it was very much whatever child or children are supposed to come to me now, I have a heart wide open to accept them.
I love that.
There was a big part of me that was afraid I was going to be asked to walk down that road again. But I knew that there wasn't anything I would change about being Joy's mom. So if that's what I needed to walk again, then I was willing to walk it.
Is the experience with your daughter Joy what led you into working in this niche field of medically complex adoption, and how did that start?
Absolutely. I was teaching at the university when we adopted Joy, and I don't want to take up too much time telling her full story, but we came home from the NICU after a pretty reasonable amount of time, and they were like, oh, she'll need your first heart surgery in 6 months, you're good. And she very quickly destabilized at home, and we ended up making this emergency run to the children's hospital. She almost, her oxygen saturation, which for most of us is supposed to be between 95 and 100, with her deep heart defect, she needed to be, between 75 and 85. And when we got to our local emergency room, her oxygen saturation was 29.
Oof.
So she was really, really sick from a cardiac standpoint, almost, within a few days of being home from the NICU. So I actually had to transition the next semester to teaching exclusively online, which meant that I was staying home with Joy. And I was approached about volunteering in special needs adoption and thought, okay, like that would be a great use of my time while I'm home with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to teaching it, gives me a way to, at the time I was thinking it gives me a way to repay her birth parent for this incredible gift. And as my adoption process kind of progressed, there were some big pieces that were missing. One of them being adoption subsidy, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit too. But there were these big pieces that were missing in terms of how to help the hospital navigate the fact that we hadn't finalized our adoption yet, and Joy was needing all of these huge medical decisions to be made. The hospital didn't understand that we had all of the paperwork and legal authority to make those decisions. And there wasn't anybody to hold their hand. So I found myself doing it, even though I didn't speak adoption yet. It was still a relatively new language for me. And just there were pieces that were missing. And so I thought, okay, well, if I can help even one other family, like Joy's birth parents, feel like they're not alone and let them know that families do want to adopt their child. And if I can help one other adoptive family not have to bear the burden of being that liaison and doing that communication while they're also trying to care for their incredibly sick child, then maybe I will do my little bit of good in my little corner of the world, which is what I always tell my kids. When things are overwhelming in the news or anywhere like that, we do our little bit of good in our little bitty corner, and hopefully that adds up over time and over space. And so I started, as a volunteer. And then the opportunity came to open up an agency, like a full adoption agency after Joy had passed, that would do exclusively medically complex adoptions. And so I took advantage of that opportunity. Yeah. That agency closed in 2021. And I took a break from adoption for a while. And then, it came back because there wasn't anybody standing in that gap. And I have a unique skill set, and I wanted to continue to serve families. And my health deteriorated in 2021, and I had to step away for a little while, but my health had recovered, so I was able to come back and start doing the work again in 2022. And I missed it.
Yeah.
Missed it a lot.
I think a lot of people who take a step out of adoption, which sometimes is very much needed, also gets that pull back in, because you're so in it and you're so passionate about it, which is what brought us in to begin with. Can you tell us a little bit about the ACF Plus program and how it specifically addresses the need of medically complex children?
So the Plus program was designed exclusively for medically complex adoption. We don't have any typical adoptions come through our Plus program. They are all children with some type of diagnosis that's expected to significantly impact childhood and potentially adulthood. The Plus program is a nationwide program as well. So even though the agency currently is licensed in Florida and Georgia, this program allows us to work nationwide. The degree to which we work in each individual state with adoptive parents and or birth parents varies by what that state's laws are.
Okay.
But in some cases, in some states, we're only consulting with agencies that are already there to help them navigate and providing our expertise. In some states, we're only working with adopted parents. We can't work with birth parents directly, but again, we may consult with an agency that is working with birth parents directly. And in some states, we're able to work with birth parents and adoptive parents, and we utilize local resources to work with both. So it really just depends on the individual state laws. But this program is meant to be a nationwide program so that these resources are accessible by everybody in the United States, and it isn't just localized to one state or one region that is being serviced.
That's so wonderful. And so, first of all, if you are a family that is open to adopting a medically complex child, do you keep a list? Does it cost anything to get on that list in order to see these situations?
So our adoptive parent registry for the ACF Plus program is completely free. There's an intake form on the website. Families fill that out. They send in a copy of their home study, or they get their social worker to send me a copy of their home study. And I, kind of review the information, get them added to our registry. In addition to being added to our registry for free, we also provide our families with access to Your Adoption Finance Coach, which helps them with grants and things like that they can go ahead and start working on while they're waiting for a match. Our listserv is accessed not only for our ACF cases, but if partner agencies reach out to us and say, I'm trying to identify an adoptive family for this child, we send their information out to everybody on our listserv so that they can have access, because we don't want to gatekeep in medically complex adoption. The idea is we want kids to have permanent loving homes as quickly as possible, and we want to make sure that those homes are well resourced, have everything that they need to help the child reach their fullest potential, and that they're knowledgeable. And so there's no gatekeeping with ACF Plus. We really just are here to try to help. So we have our registry that other adoption professionals can utilize. And then also, the families don't pay anything for it either.
Okay, but I want to make it clear for people who might think that they would be open to adopting medically complex children. Number one, when you get your home study, that is something you'll have to discuss with your home study provider, because you have to have that approved on your home study that you are open to this. I'm wondering.
And they can't join our registry unless their home study specifically states that they're open to medically complex. And it needs to be to the degree of cases that fall under our medically complex program. So if all that they're open to is a cleft lip and palate, that doesn't meet the threshold for our medically complex program. So they need to have good, thorough, inclusive conversations with their social worker who's writing the home study to make sure that they understand the scope of what they're open and resourced for. One of the things that I see with families is we may have a family who's very open to medically complex cases and they want to present on cases, but they may not have the resources to truly meet that child's need. If you live 4 hours from the nearest children's hospital, we probably should not place a child with osteogenesis imperfecta in your home, because that child is more likely to have broken bones that will need to be set at a pediatric hospital rather than your local ER. And we don't want that child being in pain for 4 hours for the drive. There are considerations that we have to take into or things that we have to take into consideration. And so we want families to have those really good conversations with their social workers during the home study process, and have those conversations ongoing. Families change over time, needs change over time, resources change over time. So we want them to really consider, as they go through the adoption process, what they're open to.
Yeah, and I was sort of going to ask that. So just because a family comes in and they have a home study that says they're approved, do you automatically put them on your list saying, well, I hope that the social worker who approved this really talked to them about it and they are somebody who's truly prepared for a medically complex situation? Or do you look at it further and say, and like challenge them a little bit more, like what makes you believe that you can handle this? What resources do you have in place? So do you qualify them, or do you not, or is it case by case?
I would say 99.9% of the cases that we get, we are doing qualifying steps. There may be an occasional case where the family already has experience that's demonstrated in their home study. If they're already raising 3 children with Down syndrome and they're looking to adopt a 4th child with Down syndrome, that one I may not do an extra qualifying step with them for a child with Down syndrome, because they are very familiar with the diagnosis. They're already seeing the specialist. They know what to expect and anticipate. But even then, I would say, how do you expect to manage the 4th child? So every case is going to have some type of qualifier. Whether or not a family understands the medical piece, there may be an occasional case where I let the medical piece slide, but we're still going to look at, do you have the resources to manage this child coming in, and what their potential needs could be over their lifetime. One of the other things is everybody wants to help the vulnerable baby, right? Like we all see the this sweet little infant who hasn't missed any milestones yet, who, is sitting there in the NICU and is tiny and everything. But if this is a child who has, a really severe hypoxic brain injury and is never going to walk or crawl or be able to bathe themselves or be able to use the bathroom, do you have the resources potentially available to you as they grow and reach the size of an adult? If you're in a third floor apartment and this child is going to need to use a wheelchair, you don't necessarily need to be on the ground floor today, because babies are really easy to carry up and down those stairs. But what's your plan for when the child is 5 years old and needs a wheelchair? What's your plan for, when he's 10 and you really can't get up and down those stairs anymore because now you're 10 years older as well? So looking at not just what this baby needs, but what the child, middle schooler, high schooler, adult may need as well. And that's not always predictable, right? We have a scope, a spectrum is what I like to call it. I like to think of the protractor that's 180 degrees. This is best case scenario. This is worst case scenario. We think the child is going to be somewhere in this wedge of the pie, but are you prepared for that whole protractor type idea?
Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. Do you collaborate with medical professionals and specialists either to get more information or to provide the family with supports going forward? How do you bring those people into the situations?
So I really love to collaborate with medical professionals. I think it's really important for the people that are actively caring for a child from a medical perspective to have input on what they expect a child's needs to be in the short and long term. I also think that it helps educate them on what adoption looks like. So I think it's a two-way education street, right? Like, the number of times that medical professionals will say, why would somebody want to adopt a child like this? Like, why wouldn't they just leave them in the hospital or let them go into foster care or something like that? And then they see the family that comes in and they fall in love with the family that's come in. And now they know that that's an option going forward for future patients. In the last year, I've had more cases come from medical professionals that I've worked with in the past that have specifically thought of me and how I've brought this really great family. And so now they want to work with us again when they've got a new family that needs us.
You know what?
But I
just want to specify here. I just rolled my eyes when you said that, like very visibly. And I just want to say, you're right. I want to back up a second because that was an honest question by that medical profession who says, why would somebody want to adopt that child? I rolled my eyes, but I'm also like, I've been in this industry for so long. And I have to, I just did this whole live about both and in adoption and so I just want to say that was an honest question and how beautiful that we were able to demonstrate and educate, and you were, so that they would call somebody to love this baby the way they deserve to be loved, no matter how long they are on this earth. So
exactly.
I just wanted, for anyone watching on YouTube, when saw my eye roll, I want to correct myself.
It's okay, because again, I think it's that perspective, right? Like, you speak the language that you know, and I know that I can find a family. I have, sometimes I have to search for a while, but I believe that I can find a family. And a hospital, they're looking at it from a more clinical side of things, and it's very overwhelming for them to think about somebody taking this child home. And so it's maybe not for them. And sometimes even birth parents are like, I can't believe you would find somebody who would want to do this. And it's because it's so overwhelming for them. And they can't, some of them can't even fathom how they would manage to do this. And they want to do it even sometimes, but they can't figure out a way to make it work for them. And, when we present them with a good family, the birth parents are always relieved, that this is an option to them. And I've had a few times where birth parents, came to me very overwhelmed, and I can't do this. I don't know how I would ever do this. And then we give them 10 families who want to do it, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe this isn't as scary as I initially thought that it was. And I've had several birth families that ended up parenting, and I still hear from them from time to time. And they're like, this was a great decision. I'm glad that I felt supported to explore what my alternatives were, but I love that I made this choice and things are going well. Or, hey, we took this bump. Do you mind connecting me with a family, that can help me figure out what resources I need and things like that. So I think it's really beautiful that people come to it sometimes with that assumption, because we can shift it in their brain and help them get to a point of acceptance and understanding.
For those who are considering that maybe they could do this, and there are so many angels out there who just want to be there for the medically complex, and the more severe is what they were called to do. For people who want to take this on, there are still expenses. And you're still going through a private agency, right? It's not through the system, through the foster care system. Talk to me a little bit about expenses. And I just received a situation that was very medically complex, and it was the cost associated was about $50,000. And my first reaction is, that's going to scare everybody away because of all the financials that they're going to have to put into this situation. And I was reminded two things. One is, just like you don't want to put a different price on race, which used to be done, and it was gross. Nobody should have a price depicted on them just because they might have some complexities, right? So that was one thing. Two was, there are still fees involved. There still has to be an attorney. There still has to be a social worker and an agency, and maybe even more so and more hours put into making sure this baby is taken care of and all the other things that an agency does. And there are grants. So I want to talk about a little bit more about the cost associated with situations like this and what's available. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about subsidies, but specifically about adoption grants.
So you're absolutely right. More often than not, the medically complex cases actually require more hours of time. Even attorney time in some cases. Hospitals may not understand the legal things across state lines. And I've had so many hospitals that'll come back and say, well, you don't have the right paperwork for an adoption. But it's because their attorneys are familiar with the laws in their state, and you have adoption paperwork maybe from Georgia. So like a Texas attorney hospital attorney might be looking for conservatorship paperwork, which is what Texas says. That's not what we do in Georgia. So a hospital attorney may need to speak to our agency attorney. So that's attorney time that is going into a case. There is a tremendous amount of more emotional support that is often needed for the birth parents. A lot of the birth parents that we work with are married couples with intended pregnancies. Adoption was never on their radar. But nobody anticipated this extreme medical complexity that now prevents them from being able to successfully parent for whatever the reason is. Maybe they're dependent on 2 family income, and there is no way for them to give up one family member's income, but the child's never going to be able to go to daycare, and they need a parent that's at home with them to take them to frequent appointments and things like that. There can be a lot of reasons. So there's a lot more emotional support that's given to the birth parent. And then to get the adoption subsidies, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, on average is 100 to 150 hours of man time from somebody at the agency.
Wow.
So that's a tremendous investment that does not occur in a typical adoption. And so there are a good bit of expenses. Most agencies attempt to reduce and just take, like we fundraise at ACF to help offset some of the cost of our ACF Plus program. We do a good bit of fundraising throughout the year to help offset some of those costs. Some agencies have a robust enough typical program that they can, absorb some of the cost for their medically complex adoptions. But just because there is a price sticker attached doesn't mean that the agency hasn't considered the financial implications of having the fees on that case. It's usually, that's what it's going to cost them to do the case. Now, adoption grants are amazing. And in medically complex adoption, there are a lot of grants available. Some of those grants you have to apply and be approved for before you take placement. Some of them you have to be approved for. I believe there's even a few you have to be approved for before you even match. There's a lot of really great people out there that do the adoption grant work. I write grants from a organizational standpoint, but I don't write the grants for like a per child or per adoption case standpoint. But we do utilize the Your Adoption Finance Coach to help our families through that process, because it's a tremendously important process. And I will say we've had several families lately that have gotten fully funded. Like all their adoption fees have been covered by grants. And so I think that that's really amazing that we have those types of resources out there available to families. And I would say even the families that haven't been fully funded, the ones that have actively worked to get adoption grants have gotten enough that between that and the adoption tax credit, they're pretty well covered.
Okay, awesome. Now, you've mentioned a couple times adoption subsidies. Let's just dive into that. What are you talking about, and how does that work?
So in the United States, under the Social Security Act, there's something called the Title IV program. And this program primarily works with kids who have been in foster care when they're adopted. But if you are doing a private domestic adoption and the child meets the criteria in terms of medical complexity to get qualified for Social Security disability, that is an automatic qualifier for federal adoption subsidy assistance. So basically, if you're adopting a child who is really medically complex and you can get them qualified for Social Security disability, they can get the same benefits that kids who are adopted through foster care get. These benefits include a one-time reimbursement for some adoption expenses. It's usually $1,500. Some states are different. You get a monthly stipend, usually a small amount of money that is just meant to cover things that insurance doesn't, like the babysitter that you have to get because you can't hire the 16-year-old down the street to watch a medically complex child. You've got to get an adult who, needs to make a little bit more per hour. The pizza on the day that you've been in clinic all day with a whole bunch of different appointments and you're just too exhausted to make supper. Hearing aid batteries, that special piece of adaptive equipment that your child needs to be successful, but that insurance doesn't cover. That's the type of, an adaptive vehicle, modifications to your home. That's the type of stuff the stipend is meant to cover. And then the biggest piece is Medicaid. The stipend and Medicaid continue until the child reaches adulthood. It starts at the finalization of your adoption and it continues until adulthood. It's an incredibly important piece of medically complex adoption. And in terms of what specific benefits, like that, how much that stipend is, varies from state to state. And in some states, it even varies from county to county. In some states, you negotiate what that rate is. In some states, it's a set rate statewide or, set by county. Some states use a mathematical formula. You check off, my child uses these supports. They see these specialists, and the state spits out a number, and that's what you get. So that all varied. I'm the poster child for why this program is so important. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I got into actually working for an adoption agency so that I can help families get qualified for it. When Joy was born, my ex was a pharmacist and was working for a national retail chain. I taught at a university. We had what we thought was really great insurance. Joy had multiple millions of dollars in health care throughout her lifetime in 14 months. You know, she had numerous cardiac surgeries, spent lots of time in the cardiac ICU, had to have specialty formula and feeding equipment and all of this kind of stuff. And we ended up being responsible for about 10% of that. And after she passed, we had almost $1 million in medical debt.
Ooh.
If Joy had lived, we would have been stuck in a cycle of declaring bankruptcy over and over again until we could have gotten her at least approved for a Medicaid waiver. At the time, the Medicaid waiver program in Alabama was a 3-year wait. I don't know what it is now. And then the other piece was that because we did not have Medicaid for her, we couldn't access Medicaid only services. Where I lived in Alabama at the time was very rural. There was only one home health care nursing organization that served my area, and they only took Medicaid. So I couldn't even cash pay for a nurse to come watch her so that I could take a nap during the day or, you know, get some stuff done. So it took a good 6 months after she passed away for me to learn how to sleep longer than 15 minutes at a time.
Wow.
So the Medicaid piece is honestly the most important piece of making sure that families have the tools and supports and resources that they need to help a child reach their fullest potential. We were not set up for permanency when we skipped that step with Joy. We could have, you know, worked to get adoption subsidy for her. I didn't know how important it would be. And I'm still, again, it's part of my story. I'm thankful that I get to help all these families now get that resource put in place. And that's the biggest thing that I go to the adoption conferences for, is to educate on how to get those things in place. I do that work completely for free, you know, teach other adoption professionals, teach families, you know, try to share that information because it is so critical for families to get those supports.
So how is that done? So you've just adopted a child who, let's just continue talking about medically complex because that's easy. And you know that there are complexities and all of that. So the child is born. Does the family wait till they get back home and apply through their state? If the agency they adopted through is in a different state than where they're living, how do you get involved, or how does that work? What do you have to do?
So the first step is to, you're going to take placements, right? The child's going to be placed with you.
Right.
I recommend in almost every single case that if you know that you're adopting a child who has some type of medical diagnosis, that there be a custodial agency involved. Because what you're going to need in order to get the child qualified for subsidy is the Social Security disability approved. Most adoptive parents make too much money to meet the income threshold. So they make too much, and that's an automatic, we can't qualify this child for Social Security disability. When the child's custody belongs to an agency, though, they're considered a legal orphan because their custody belongs to an entity rather than an individual. So then there's no income. The adoptive parents can make $50 billion a year. There's absolutely no income requirement, and we get that SSDI approval letter. And that's what we need to get the adoption subsidy.
So it's really important before you finalize, get this piece in place.
Yes, if you do not have a signed subsidy contract with your state prior to finalization, you do not get subsidy. There is no going back and doing it later. You have to have it done prior to finalization. I know of an attorney recently who actually had to go back and vacate an adoption, basically undo that finalization step in order to get subsidy for a child because the child desperately needs it. And nobody explained to this family that the Medicaid would stop as soon as they finalize.
Wow.
And so the attorney is helping the family navigate that process, but nobody wants that in adoption. Nobody wants to ever have to vacate an adoption. Nobody wants to have children sitting in limbo and not have permanency for any amount of time. Now, I will say, because it's a government process to get SSDI approved, and then it's a government process to get subsidy approved, most families do not finalize in that 6-month window.
Right.
Most families are going to have that extended period of time. They're going to have to undergo more frequent post-placement supervision. They're going to have those delays. Again, nobody in adoption wants that, but we also, and what is the higher priority, is to make sure families have the tools, supports, and resources that they need for permanency. So we want to make sure that we have Medicaid and families aren't stuck in a cycle of declaring bankruptcy. We want to make sure that they have access to all the resources that they need, so that parents can take a break and that kids can have all the tools that they need. What I was doing with Joy was not going to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And so I don't want other families set up for failure. We want them set up for success.
And this is exactly why I just did a whole podcast episode with a woman named Maureen Dykinga. Go back and listen to that episode if you haven't, about early childhood, early intervention, and how important it is to get all of these resources as soon as you can in place, because it's only going to help you later. I know we could spend a whole hour on just subsidies. I just want to say one more thing about it. So do you ask the agency you adopted from to help you navigate that, even if it's in a different state? Or do you ask your home study agency to help you with that? Who is helping with that?
So the agency that holds custody is who has to apply for the Social Security disability.
Okay.
And then who helps do the subsidy piece varies by situation. But in private adoption, it is always applied for in the adoptive parent's state. So if the adoptive parents live in Kansas and the child was born in Texas and the agency is in Texas, the agency in Texas will apply for the Social Security disability, and they will assist with part of the application process in Kansas for subsidy. But the subsidy will come from the state of Kansas because that's where the adoptive parents live.
Okay, so is that something that the adoptive parent can then do on their own once they have that piece that the agency helped them with, that they could go get that application?
It varies by state. Every state does it differently, and there's no uniform way that it's done. In some states, everything is done with the adopted parents directly working with the state, except that this agency may provide like some of the adoption paperwork. In some states, everything is done with the agency, and the adoptive parents are only there to sign the contract at the end. It really, truly varies from state to state, and in some states from county to county. It's frustrating and maddening that I can't give a more consistent answer, but it varies case by case. What is the same in every case is that the custodial agency needs to be the one applying for the Social Security disability and getting that benefit established, so you have the pathway to get the adoption subsidy.
Okay, so all I'll say about that is, if you think your child may qualify later for a disability, talk to your agency about it from the get-go and see what they think and if they'd be willing to help you do that.
Yes, absolutely.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I would love, as we're kind of wrapping up, to have you share a memorable success story from your work at ACF Plus program.
Let me see. I have so many success stories. Again, thank you to social media. I have a lot of the adoptive parents that add me, and I get to watch their kids grow up. And it's hard when kids pass, no matter how long they have with their adoptive parents. That's always a difficult part of my job. But I have a case right now that came, one of our first cases through the ACF Plus program, where it was a really hard open adoption initially. The adoptive parents and birth parents were really struggling with all of the feelings and emotions that were very complex in the beginning. And the child's diagnosis was a very complex diagnosis. But the adopted parents and birth parents have had a visit now, and they've had, there's an older sibling on the birth parent side. And the birth parents wrote the adoptive parents this really beautiful letter after the visit and talked about how thankful they were that they still got to be a part of the child's lives, and how much the big sister appreciated being a part of the child's life and the visit, but how they saw where the adoptive parents were able to provide resources and things for this child that they would never have been able to provide. And I love the way that the story is unfolding. The child is doing exceptionally well. They're near a hospital that has a great program for this diagnosis.
Yeah.
And the adoptive parents are able, as this is their only child and they don't intend to adopt again, they're able to just put their full focus on this child and helping them reach their fullest potential. The birth parents, it was open adoption is just awkward anyway in the beginning because it's this weird, like, how are we going to fit together? And it's kind of like a marriage, where you all have the same goal and you all have a lot of love, but it's weird figuring out how all the pieces fit. And I love that everybody is working towards this common goal of the kids being okay, big sister and the child that's being adopted, and they're all working together, and it's unfolding to be this really beautiful story, and I love that.
Yeah. Oh, I love that too. Is there any advice you'd give to families considering adopting a child with complex medical needs?
Make sure that the professionals that you're working with understand the moving pieces, that you talk to them about subsidy. And if the child has a diagnosis that is going to impact them and the agency or professional that you're talking to is saying, oh, I don't think they qualify for subsidy, reach out to one of the experts in subsidy and verify that they don't qualify, because oftentimes the professionals aren't trying to push off the work or whatever. They're just not as educated in it because it's not something that was really done a whole lot until the last few years. And then also, this is my soapbox as the nerdy molecular biologist. And so I will say this every time I get a chance. If you are looking at a diagnosis and you're looking at medical records and you're trying to research what that diagnosis means, use websites that end in .org or .edu, because they're not profiting off scaring you. They're going to give you a very realistic picture of what it looks like to parent a child with this diagnosis. And the .orgs usually connect you to more of the family-run organizations, and the .edus are going to be more of your true scientific education on a diagnosis. And .coms tend to profit off of whatever they're telling you, and so they tend to scare you or paint an unrealistic picture, either to the negative or the positive.
Wow, what a great piece of advice. Jennifer, this has been so insightful and amazing, and is really going to help a lot of people, I think, who are open to this type of adoption in these children who need it the most. I want to end with a couple quick fire questions.
Okay.
I want to give you an opportunity to shout out a person or an organization who has impacted your life as it relates to adoption.
I want to give praise to Stephanie Thompson and the National Down Syndrome Adoption Network, NDSAN. Stephanie does an amazing job managing such a huge resource that's available to the adoption community. She keeps a registry of families who are specifically hoping and looking to adopt a child with Down syndrome. And a lot of her families are open to other diagnoses. So if I don't have a family on my own registry, she's the first person that I go to. She, provides just a tremendous amount of her time and her heart into that work, and she is amazing. We are all better for her being a part of the adoption community.
That's beautiful. What's your hidden talent?
It's not really all that hidden, maybe in the adoption world, but I am amazing in the kitchen. Everybody always wants to come to my house to cook. I don't know how to cook for a small number of people, so I always make this tremendously large amount of food, and then I'm sending it to the neighbors or to people at church or wherever. I love to bake. I love spending time in the kitchen. That's my best mental health therapy thing is just getting in the kitchen and cooking, baking.
What's one thing you're excited about that's coming up this year?
Oh, this year. I don't know. I have a lot coming up this year. There's quite a few things coming up. I'm excited for my kids to start 4th grade. They start that next Thursday. And I remember 4th grade being when things got really fun at school. It wasn't just like laying foundational things. It's like when all the new stuff started to come in. So I'm excited for them for that. And, just a lot of things coming this year.
What's the one piece of advice you'd give your younger self?
My therapist said this to me a few months ago, and as the nerdy scientist, it's something that should have been in my brain, but nobody had ever said it to me directly, so I had never internalized it. And it's actually written on, you see me looking off to the side, it's actually written on a whiteboard so that I remember it in my office. And that is, thoughts are not facts. So just because I would think something about myself did not make it a fact about myself. I'm incredibly hard on myself sometimes. And that was a piece of advice that I was like, oh, and Brene Brown said at one point, you don't have to earn rest. That would be something else I would want to tell my younger self, is that I didn't need to work myself to the point of exhaustion in order to earn a break, so that I could take a break when I needed to.
So good. Describe adoption in 3 words.
Messy and worth it. Worth it count as one? Count that as 2?
Do you have another one? You can put it in if you want.
Joyful, because it's full of my joy.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jennifer Kelly, for all of your insight and expertise. And remember, success is a continuous journey. If you find yourself veering off course, just steer back onto the roadmap until you reach your destination. And whatever you do, never lose hope. Hope is that light inside you that will lead you to your dreams. Thank you so much for listening to the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you liked what you heard and learned some things, I would love it if you would subscribe, give us a 5-star review so that more people can get educated about all of these important things that they need to know if they're going to adopt a child. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Jennifer. Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.